Okay, we're back with the next part of our Theros Beyond Death limited set review. This time it's for green. And we're going to start, again, alphabetically. Arasa of the Endless Web. 4 mana, 3/5 reach. Good. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/2 green spider token with reach. So your opponent's not going to do that very much, but they usually are going to have a handful of instants and sorceries. Maybe a bit less in this set than normal because there's enchantments that do more, right? There's like all the omens, which would are normally effects that would be on instants or sorceries, but in this set they're on enchantments. So you're not going to get maybe tons of value out of the ability of Arasta, but you don't need to get tons of value. 4 mana 3/5 reach is already a very good card. If you get 1 or 2 spiders, you're like just living it up. And they're probably going to still cast an instant or sorcery or two. So this card seems very good to me. A minus, B plus, probably B plus. Binding of the Titans. It is a 2 mana saga. Chapter 1 is each player mills the top 3 cards of their library. Chapter 2 is you exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. And for every creature exiled, you gain a life. And then Chapter 3 is return target creature or land from your graveyard to your hand. Well, this should almost always replace itself on Chapter 3, especially in a green deck. 3 cards, even just from itself, 3 cards is almost always going to have at least 1 land or creature. And you're probably usually going to be able to get a creature back, right? So you have 15, 16 creatures in your deck. Then out of the 39 cards, you're looking at well over a third, about 40%. So you're probably going to mill 1 to 2 creatures, as well as 1 to 2 lands. Overall, close, between 2 and 3, 2.5 maybe. So you can get a land if you want it, although it's going to be on turn 4 for you. You can get a creature if you want that, which is more likely. Each player milling 3. Okay, I'm not sure how good that is. You could both find escape things. If they can't do their escape right away, though, then you can exile their escape stuff with the second chapter. You gain a little bit of life. I think this card is fine, but not exciting. It's kind of like a Raised Dead, mostly, that does a little bit of stuff beforehand. It's a bit slower than a Raised Dead, more expensive than a Raised Dead. It has some synergies because it's an enchantment. It's not like Raised Dead was really a world beater. It's a little bit better than Raised Dead, I think, because of the first 2 chapters, but not a ton. So I think it's like a C minus. Perfectly playable card, but nothing exciting whatsoever. Okay, so Chainweb Arachneer, 1 mana 1/2 reach. When it enters the battlefield, deals damage equal to its power to target creature with flying and opponent controls. So maybe you attack with a smaller creature and they block and eat your dude, and then you can finish it off with this. I don't think there's going to be many. I guess we did at least see one X1 flyer in black, and this is more X1 hate for flyers then. But the big thing is that has escape. So for 3 green green, and you can cast this out of your graveyard, exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard, and it escapes with 3+1/+1 counters on it. Which means if you can escape this, you're getting a 4/5 spider for 5 and exiling 4 other cards. And you're dealing 4 damage to a flyer, which is real good. But you really want to be able to escape this. I think altogether, you're going to be able to escape it often enough that it's like a B minus. But you do have to be careful that you don't have too much escape stuff, too much stuff that really wants to escape like this in your deck, right? This gets a lot worse in multiples because you're not going to be able to escape multiple of them. But multiples not just of this card, but of cards that want to be escaped. And this is one of the better ones we've seen. But again, the more escape cards you have, the more they start to compete with each other. Destiny Spinner, 2 mana, 2/3. I'm in. Enchant creature and enchantment spells you control can't be countered. Fine. And then 4. Target land you control becomes an XX elemental. With trample and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments you control, it's still a land. This, I mean, 2 mana, 2/3. I'm already in. This ability can be a nice mana sink late in the game, and late in the game, you have a decent chance of having 2, 3, maybe 4 enchantments to make that land be a real sized creature and not just like, I mean, even if it's just a chump blocker, that might not be the worst ever if you have tons of extra lands, or just a chump attacker. I don't think this ability is great because it's going to be hard to have a lot of enchantments, but it's nice that it does something in the very late game, especially since it's already a good creature in the early game. I think this is a C+. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. You can play an additional land on each of your turns. Okay. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So if you want to play multicolored, this is exceptional filtering. Playing the extra land is not that big a deal. The exceptional mana fixing is probably not that big a deal, honestly. 3 mana 2/4 is fine. This is probably like a C+. First I roll in games. 3 mana, you make a 1/1, then chapter 2, you put 3 1/1 counters on target creature you control. Hopefully you still have at least the 1/1 around. If you do, then you've got a 4/4 that can attack on turn 4. That's pretty good. If you still have a creature, then chapter 3, if you control every creature with power 4 or greater, draw 2 cards. We've seen a number of those in red and green, even if somehow your stuff gets disrupted from the first 2 chapters. Okay. And they would have to use resources to disrupt this stuff. So if you can get this off, then you draw 2 cards. And then chapter 4, you make a gold token, which is like kind of whatever. I mean, it fits with the story. Gold token is like a treasure, but it doesn't have to tap. So you can just sacrifice it for a mana of any color. This card looks extremely good. I think it's an A. If you can get it all off, right? And it's not that easy to disrupt, especially if you've played a 2-drop before this, that you could have 2 different targets to put your 1/1 counters on. Then it's going to be quite hard to disrupt. And it's going to be, 4/4 worth of stats and drawing 2 cards, which is just a really good deal for 3 mana. And then you get an extra mana back at the end, I guess. Gift of Strength, decent combat trick, C-. We've seen it before, it's a reprint. 3/3 until end of turn, reach until end of turn. Hydra's Growth. This is an aura. When it enters the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on an enchanted creature, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you double the number of 1/1 counters on it. So by your next turn, it's 2. By the turn after that, it's 4. By the turn after that, it's 8. By the turn after that, it's 16. And the game really ought to be over if they haven't removed the creature yet. This is risky. It doesn't provide any protection against your creature getting killed, except for a measly 1/1 counter when it comes in. And after a little while, more counters. Having said that, this card can win the game pretty much by itself. If you play a 2-drop, you play this next, you've got a 3/3 attacking on turn 3, you've got a 4/4 attacking on turn 4, you've got a 6/6 attacking on turn 5, you've got a 10/10 attacking on turn 6, and your opponent just can't deal with that unless they have some kind of removal, probably. So they need to have removal. It puts them to the test. I think we haven't seen enough removal for this to not be good a lot of the time. It is very risky, but I'm going to give it a C+ because a lot of the time it can just win the game or make your opponent just invest a lot of resources trying to get rid of this or the creature. And if they get rid of this, you've still gotten some number of 1/1 counters. So I think this card is actually good. Okay, next we have Hyrax Tower Scout. 3 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, untap target creature. 3 mana 3/3 is already pretty good. The upside is not big, but it's not nothing. So, yeah, it's a C, maybe a C+, but probably just a C. Used to be that I would give a 3 mana 3/3 a C+, but I don't think I would anymore. It's close, though, to a C+. Elysian Caryatid. 2 mana 1/1. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, or 2 mana of any color if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Mana dorks are good, fixing is good. We've seen a couple of rares that can help you fix a little bit. So rares don't matter that much, I don't think. This, I guess, can help you fix a little bit by helping you find your splash land. And here's a common that helps you fit. This should be one of the better commons I expect. 2 mana dork, even if it is extremely. Oh, you know what? 1 toughness makes it extremely valuable. Fragile. If it were a 1/2, I would think this might be the best green common. As it is, I'm only going to give it a C plus because I think there's just a lot of stuff that can kill this. Inspire Awe is a fog that doesn't fog enchanted and enchantment creatures and lets you scry 2. I don't think you're likely enough to be able to have a monopoly on enchantment and enchanted creatures that this will be good. I mean, you can play a little bit of tricks in terms of that you're going to have this particular fog and your opponent doesn't. But 4 mana is just especially. If this were 1 mana, you could think about it if you had a lot of enchantment creatures. Although even so, it's pretty hard to really like. You need to have enchantment creatures that can block their non-enchantment creatures and eat them, and you're holding up 4 mana, which kind of telegraphs this if it's any good at all. I can't imagine this card is good. It's got to be like a D. Colossus's design. Creatures control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is your devotion to green. Well, this is a reason to have big devotion, but you also kind of need evasion, and we haven't seen that much trample yet. So it being 6 mana and not giving any kind of evasion or trample, I'm not so huge on this because you also need to have like, if you have a lot of green creatures, you're going to have a lot of green devotion. You're going to make them huge, but I'm a bit leery of this. I'm going to give it a C minus, but it's again very dependent on what the format looks like. Loathsome Chimera, 3 mana 4/1, very aggressive stats. Escapes for 5 and exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. Okay, but it escapes with a +1/+1 counter, so it's a 5 mana 5/2 when it escapes. This is purely on the 2-for-1 value. I mean, a 3 mana 4/1 is actually okay, but it's going to trade off a lot, which isn't so bad with escape. So I think this is pretty good. I'm going to give it a C plus, but you really need to watch again how many escape cards you have, because the number of cards in your graveyard is going to be a really important resource in these kinds of decks. But I mean, even if it didn't have escape, it would probably be like a C minus. So I think the escape pushes it up to C plus. It's fine. It's actually pretty good with the escape, I think, because it's likely to be a 2-for-1. It costs a lot of mana to be a 2-for-1, but likely to be a 2-for-1. Let's go to Mantle of the Wolf next. It's another aura, enchants one of your creatures. Enchanted creature gets +4/+4, which is a lot. And when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you make 2/2 wolves. So unless your opponent gets rid of the creature this is supposed to enchant in response to you casting this, you're going to get +4/+4 right away. And then whenever that creature leaves the battlefield, so unless they do some kind of pacifism effect, then whenever that creature leaves the battlefield, this will, whether it's exiled, bounced, or dies, this will go to the graveyard from your battlefield, and you'll get the 2/2s. This card looks very good to me. If you can ever get a window open, you're going to make a huge creature, and you're probably at least going to get 2/2s back, and probably get an attack in. So yeah, this looks like a B plus, I think. The only thing that concerns you is that your opponent might be able to respond to you casting this. So you want to try to play around that if you can. Let's move on to Moss Viper. 1 mana 1/1 Death Touch. Solid, was really good in original Theros. Probably not going to be as good here, but still got to be pretty good, I think. We're going to give it a C. I almost might want to give it a C plus if the format is good enough, but I think I'm just going to give it a C. Mystic Repeal, green instant, put target enchantment on the bottom of its owner's library. This is a removal spell. I expect almost all your opponents are going to have enchantments. They're going to have enchantments that you like to kill for 1 mana. You'll want to play this card every time. You might not want to play multiples of this card every time, but it still looks pretty good to me. C plus to B minus. It also gets around escape. It gets around gods, I guess. Probably just a C plus for this. Move on to Nessian Boar. 5 mana 10/6. All creatures able to block Nessian Boar must do so. And whenever it becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller draws a card. So, for one thing, this has the lure effect. If you have other creatures, they're all going to get in unless they remove this in response to you attacking before they block, in which case you could get blown out. So, do watch out for that a little bit. But mostly, it's going to they're all going to block this. You're going to kill probably all of them, or at least almost all of them. Your opponent, if the board is really stalled, your opponent is going to get to draw a lot of cards, which, if the board is really stalled, might deck them. If they have like 3 big creatures and not many small creatures, you might not be able to like kill everything. If they've got 3 or 4 big creatures, they're going to draw some extra cards. But then you don't have to attack, right? So you don't have to attack until you're ready. This card just looks exceptional. I'm going to give it an A minus. Making your opponent draw cards does feel bad, but it's 1 card drawn per creature, and you're probably killing all those creatures. So it's more like the creatures replace themselves, and then it's going to take them quite a bit of tempo to replay all the stuff they're drawing. Plus, some of what they're drawing is going to be land, so it's not going to be as good as the creatures you're killing. Just be aware that you don't always want to attack with this. Although, again, if the board gets really stalled, then the lure effect here, to where everything has to block this, letting your other creatures get through, might also win you the game. You just have to weigh the ups and downs of potentially them removing this before they block and then blowing you out. So, having said that, like, it's very good. It is a little expensive. It doesn't have evasion, which might actually be a good thing because you might want to force their stuff to. Anyway, I don't know. It's good. I'm gonna give it a B plus, A minus. Nessian Hornbeetle. It's a 2-mana 2/2 at the beginning of combat on your turn. If you control another creature with power 4 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This card looks very good. You just need another 4 power or more creature, and this guy's going to eventually grow, well, whatever gender. This beetle is eventually going to grow very, very large. And it's a 2-mana 2/2, which is already pretty good. I'm going to give this a B. You would think that green would have a lot of 4 power creatures. We haven't seen that many so far. There's a rare, effectively, and then a common, a rare, a mythic, and okay, so there's a couple more commons here, another common here, a mythic here, and there's some ways to grow stuff here. A uncommon, a potentially there uncommon, yeah, another common here. Yeah, this is enough, especially if you're in green red, but even just in green, I think this is good chances to grow big. Okay, Nessian Wanderer, 2-mana 1/3 Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top 3 cards of your library and reveal a land from among them. Put that in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So for all the constellations, it's going to end up drawing you probably a lot of lands. And once you get through your whole deck, if the game goes long enough to get through your whole deck, you're going to have drawn almost all the lands out of your deck, and then you're going to be drawing a lot of gas, and you're going to have a lot of mana. I think this effect, basically being able to draw a card every time an enchantment comes into play, I know it's only a land, but the effect still seems good to me. And 2-mana 1/3 isn't that below curve. I think this is a C+, and I'd watch out for it in Constructed as well, but that's another review. Nexus Wardens, 3-mana 1/4 reach. Okay, we've seen spiders or archers before that are pretty good for that. Constellation, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 2 life. Unexciting. You will play this if you're worried about flyers. You might main it, you might sideboard it. It's a D+, maybe a C-. But I think D+ for Nexus Wardens, but definitely a card you want to think about bringing in from the sideboard if you're at all worried about flyers. That this guy can block. Are these guys, a guy and a gal? These elves. They look like elves. They're not elves, they're satyrs. These satyrs can block. Let's move on to Nylea, Keen-Eyed. It's the green god. It's another 4-mana 5/6. Indestructible. You need the devotion to green, a 5 to turn it into a creature. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less. You're not comboing off with that, but that's still a nice ability. Right? Your next turn, you have 5 mana. You can cast what's normally a 4-drop and a 3-drop, right? So you can double spell more easily, or you could just cast a 6-drop a turn early, right? Either of those is pretty nice to have. And then you have this mana sink, 3 mana to reveal the top card of your library. And if it's a creature, you put it in hand. Otherwise, you may put it in a graveyard. So if it's something you need, you don't put it in the graveyard. You just leave it on top. If it's like a good instant sorcery or enchantment. If it's something you don't need or don't want, then you mill it, and that's going to help you with escape. If it has escape, I guess you could mill it if it's one of those that wants to be escaped more than it wants to be played. But I'd probably still mostly put it in my hand and play it, unless it's an escape card that isn't a creature. Anyway, um, yeah, all solid abilities. I think it's again one of the better ones. I'm going to give it an A minus. Um, as yeah, it helps turn itself on with this ability. Helps more find more stuff to win long games with this ability. Really, really strong. Obviously, you do need devotion. Nylea's Forerunner, 4 mana, 5/3. Everything you control has trample. This is solid. If you need more 4 power stuff, if you need trample because you have huge things, this guy's here for you. 3 toughness on a 5-drop isn't the most impressive, and it is a 5-drop, so I would not prioritize this. It's like a C minus, maybe a C, but I think C minus. You don't want too many of these kinds of things. 5 drops, that is. Nylea's Huntmaster. When it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +X+O until end of turn, where X is your devotion to green. So 4 mana 4/3 is already fine, and then this probably makes your 2 or 3 drop get pumped by 1 or 2, and you either get a couple more damage in, or you can maybe trade up. It seems solid. Late in the game, if it's also pretty good because if you have, say, an Nylea's Forerunner and you have a few other creatures, then you can, put it on a big trampler and get a bunch of extra power in, and that's going to help you attack. So yeah, the card seems really solid. C to maybe C plus even. I think C plus I like. Let's go to Nylea's Intervention. X green green for a sorcery. Choose one. Search your library for up to X land cards. Not to say basics, which probably won't matter too much for limited, but land cards. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is more fixing. Again, most of the fixing seems to be at high rarity, but this is more fixing. Or Nylea's Intervention deals twice X damage to each creature with flying. So if the opponent has even 1 flyer, you can cast this for like 4 to 5 and probably kill it. Which is something that green might want to do because flyers are often what it has trouble dealing with. But otherwise, you can just play it as a way to get a couple of lands, 4 mana to get 2 lands from your deck into your hand is okay. And if you flood it out, you can. I mean, deck thinning isn't that important, but if I have flooded out and I have 8 lands in play, I can draw 6 more, and then I'm almost never gonna. That's almost all the rest of the lands in my deck, and maybe I discard one to hand size, and that helps fuel my. Uh, what is the name of this mechanic? Escape. Maybe I don't know. But especially if you're 3 colors, this is good. Even I think if you're just a normal 1 or 2 color deck, then I'd still play this most of the time. But I'm not going to be super excited. I mostly want it for the second mode, but having the first mode is helpful. And I might end up playing it for the first mode more often. But having something that can deal with flyers that you don't have doesn't get stuck being a dead card if your opponent doesn't have any flyers in their deck is nice. I think I'm gonna give it a C plus. Let's move on to Nyx's Herald. 3 mana 2/3 enchantment creature. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target enchanted or enchantment creature you control gets +1/+1. So on your turn it's a 3/4 trample if you want it to be, or you can stick that somewhere else. But only on your turn. Otherwise it's a 2/3. That's pretty good, but nothing super exciting. I'm gonna give it a C plus. Nyxbloom Ancient, 7 mana 5/5 enchantment creature with trample, and if you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. This is like a D. Mostly because it's a 7 mana 5/5, and by the time you have 7 mana, do you really need to triple your mana in limited? Probably not. I don't think you want to play this card. Nyxborn Colossus, 6 mana 6/7. enchantment creature. Triple green, so great if you want devotion, not so great otherwise. You might want a large dude, you might not. It's like a C minus. Uh, let's move on. Omen of the Hunt. 3 mana Omen, flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. So this is a ramp spell. It's also fixing. So this is the common fixing that you want. Um, Maybe the 1/1 that taps for a mana of any color is the common fixing you want more than this is. But I'm worried about that dying to all of the X1 hate in the format. So this might really be the fixing that you want. 3 mana to Rampant Growth is generally not great, but this has some upsides with Devotion, Constellation, being a permanent, the Scry maybe. And the Scry is a little bit nicer if you ramping. So I think you mostly want this if you want if you want the fixing. So probably if you're splashing a third color, then this card goes way up. And you mostly don't want it otherwise, but it's not that bad otherwise either. And you might have enough other synergies. I'm gonna give this a C minus because I think you're gonna play it a decent percentage of the time, but you're also not gonna play it a decent percentage of the time. Ferrisban Brawler is next. It's a 6 mana 4/4 that when it ETBs, it fights up to one target creature you don't control. Yeah, it's like a Flame Tongue Kavu. It costs 6, and at that point, is there going to be like a 3/4 that you want to be able to trade with? Is there any X4 that can make this a clunky removal spell? I think between those uses, it's still pretty good, but because it's 6 mana, it's not great. I'm going to give it a C plus, maybe a B minus even, but somewhere in that C plus to B minus range. Plummet is back. Instant to destroy a creature with flying. Probably a sideboard card. You might main deck one and sealed. It's a pretty good sideboard card, but it's not a super high priority. I'm going to give it a D plus, but just know that it's like a sideboard card, and maybe you take it about as high as a C minus actually. Relentless Pursuit. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put a creature and or land from among them into your hand. Put the rest into your graveyard. Now, I have not done the math on this. You're going to get a creature most of the time. You're going to get a land most of the time. Are you going to get a creature and a land most of the time? That I'm less sure of. Milling yourself is a little bit of upside as well, though. 3 mana. I mean, if you have 15 creatures in your deck and 17 lands in your deck, you would expect to find almost 2 of each. If you have 16 or 17 creatures, again, it's almost 2, but it's between 1.5 and 2. I think you're going to find stuff likely enough that this is a pretty good card, especially with the milling. So I'm going to give it a C. A C? It's kind of mana intensive is the thing, right? Like, it can miss, and even if you get 2 things, it's kind of just like a divination, which is not that great for 3 mana anyway. It does fuel your graveyard a little bit. You might get a little selection. It might help your fixing a little bit, but I'm mostly on just straight C, I think. Yeah. Renata Called to the Hunt. 4 mana, star 3. This is the green demigod. The power is equal to your devotion to green. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it. So 4 mana 2/3 baseline is not very good, but the effect is very good. So yeah, I think this one is probably the best of the bunch, and I'd give it a B. Because it can also, it's very likely to be at least a 3/3, pretty often going to be a 4/3, which is good stats as well. And then the ability is quite good. Return to Nature. Choose one. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, exile target card from a graveyard. So earlier we saw this, I think it was an uncommon for 1 mana that puts just an enchantment on bottom. I think this card is a little better even though it's a 2nd mana because you can tag an artifact or an escape card, which you're probably mostly destroying an enchantment here. Obviously, if you see a god or something that's indestructible to where destroy is not going to be effective, then you'd rather have the other thing. I think the bigger thing is just that the presence of this makes that card that we looked at earlier a little bit less desirable. The presence of that makes this a tiny bit less desirable. But since that's uncommon and this is common, that's not as big a factor here. You're going to get about 3 of these disenchants per draft between just those 2 cards. I think a little more than 3, bit more than 3. And when I say you, I mean the table. Um, and you probably want one in your deck. You probably wouldn't be too unhappy taking a second one, really. This card seems pretty good to me. I think it's a C plus, maybe even a B minus. I'd be happy to run 2 if at least one of them is Return to Nature as opposed to the other thing, because tagging an enchantment or an escape card seems like a real benefit as well, or tagging an artifact or an escape card. So, and like most likely you're just drawing one anyway. But 2 mana to kill an enchantment when so many other things in this set are enchantments is pretty good. I'm gonna give it only a C plus and not a B minus because there's still a lot of stuff that's not enchantments, artifacts, or escape cards. Let's move on now to Setessan Champion. 3 mana 1/3 with Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. This is very good. You want to have a lot of enchantments with it, obviously, but holy shnikes. If you even get one trigger out of this, it's a 3 mana 2/4 that drew you a card. That's very good. If you get 2 triggers out of that, it's a 3 mana 3/5 that drew you 2 cards, which is incredibly good. I think this card, it's not going to be that hard to trigger it at least a couple times. Once you've triggered it once, it's a well above average card. Once you've triggered it twice, it's extremely good. I think this card is an A, maybe an A minus. I think it's an A, honestly. Yeah. Setessan Petitioner, 3 mana 2/2. When it ETBs, you gain life equal to your devotion to green. Yeah, you might bring this in or out depending on what deck your opponent is playing. I'm gonna go with C minus. It probably will be able to gain you a lot of life, and that is probably good enough to play a 3 mana 2/2. But it's not like if your opponent's playing some very dirtily controlled deck, your life total doesn't matter that much. Having a 3 mana 2/2 might be where you not want to be. So I think you're most of the time going to main deck this, but you're going to cut it a non-trivial percentage of the time. And if you don't main deck it, it's not the end of the world, because again, 3 mana 2/2 isn't that great, and you're going to be gaining maybe 3 to 6 life. If you play it very late, it's going to gain more, but if you play it very late and it does gain more, it's probably because the board is stalled, at which point gaining that much life isn't that big a deal. Let's move on to Setessan Skirmisher. 2 mana 2/1 Constellation. When an enchantment enters under your control, you get a 1. It just gets 1/1 until end of turn, not a 1/1 counter. Take it or leave it. The 2 mana 3/2 would be good. It wouldn't be busted. 2 mana 2/1 is not good. I think this card's like a C minus to a C. I think it's probably closest to a C. Setessan Training is 2 mana for an aura. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. I like that. So if you can get a window to get it down, it replaces itself. Enchanted creature has +1/+0 and trample. So this, you want to have some kind of synergies with it. You probably want to have some constellation stuff, and you probably also want to have just some big stuff that is looking for trample, like Nyxborn Colossus or the 7/3, wherever the 7/3 is. But it's solid there. I'm going to give it a C minus. Again, one of these, maybe you play it, maybe you don't. Skola Grove Dancer, 2 mana 2/2 enchantment creature. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you gain a life. Okay, that might gain you a little bit of life. Oh, and then 2, put the top card of your library into your graveyard. That's actually pretty nice mana sink. Not so much for the life, but more for if you have some escape cards in your deck, you can help to find them. So this is a solid card. It's a C, I think. Being an enchantment creature on cheap creatures like this is more of an upside, and on the expensive bombs is more of a downside, because the cheap creatures, they don't really want to use their premium removal on, and if they use like a Back to Nature on it, like, okay, whatever, not that big a deal. So you're not too afraid of them getting killed by the extra enchantment removal. But on the expensive bombs, you are worried about that. It dies to more stuff than it normally would. Let's move on to Voracious Typhon, not Typhoon. Typhon? Don't know how you pronounce that. 4 mana 4/4. 7 mana to escape it. but it escapes as a 7/7 with 3+1/+1 counters. This card looks extremely good. Probably the best green common. 4 mana 4/4 is good. Getting to get it back as a 2-for-1 would already be good, even though it costs 7. Getting to get it back as a 7/7 is very, very, very good. I think this card is a B, a solid B, maybe better. In fact, I'm wondering if there are many, if any, uncommons that are even this good. In green, at least. Maybe in any color. This might be the best common in the set. Let's move on to Warbriar Blessing. 2 mana. Aura, enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, enchanted creature fights up to one target creature you don't control. An enchanted creature gets +0/+2. Yeah, this card looks pretty good because it's a fight spell. It's an enchantment for Constellation. Fight spells already have this issue, so you're not too worried about the aura bit. The toughness is, I mean, better than not having it, and it helps a little bit with the fight. Really solid. I mean, 1 mana or 2 mana to fight is usually not that good, but because it has the extra toughness, devotion, and being an enchantment for, Constellation, I think that pushes it up to being good enough to where it's a pretty good card. I'm going to call it a C+, I think. Last, we've got Wolfwillow Haven. 2 mana for an enchant land. Whenever enchantment land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional green. So it's a 2 mana ramp spell, which is often pretty good. And then it also has 5 mana and sacrifice it to make a 2/2. You can only activate that during your turn. This solves a lot of the problems that ramp spells would have, in that it can do something in the late game where you just don't need a million mana. 2 mana ramp spells are good. This has a little extra upside, so I think this is a pretty good card. I'm gonna give it a B minus because I think the ramp might well be good, especially in green. There are a decent number of 2-drops in green, so it might only be like a C plus, but I think this card is very good. I don't think it's as good as Voracious Typhon, but I think this card is pretty. I guess the upside isn't that. No, I'm just gonna go down to C plus. That's kind of more my gut feel. But it wouldn't stun me if it were a B minus. Anyway, that's it for green. We'll be back with multicolored lands and artifacts soon.